Welcome to the Grief Ladies, the practical guide to what comes next. I'm Kelly Doherty.
And I'm Karen Arnold, and we are two grief professionals with over 50 years of combined experience. We're here to validate, educate, and give you tangible tools you can actually use.
Each episode motivates you to take action and reminds you it's okay to want to feel better. This is the Grief Ladies, a guide to what comes next.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Karen here today with Kelly and our very special guest, Sam. Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Yeah, we were just saying, like, we started talking long before we hit record on this. So it always feels like we're like saying hi again. But I want to officially introduce you, Sam, to everybody. So Sam Sundius is a visual artist and the professional enabler behind Art of Discipline. She coaches neurodivergent creatives and business babes to ditch stress and find more joy and money in their work. So, Sam, we're really, really glad to have you here today. Feels like there's a lot that we have to talk about.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of mentioned in the pre-show chat, it's a little bit funny to say it, but like I'm very jazzed to talk about grief. Like I'm pumped right now. Well, that's good, Sam, because we love talking about grief.
Yeah, we do. We get it. Kelly, yeah, go ahead. Start us off.
Yeah. So, Sam, would you mind just telling us a little bit, because I think it will be a good segue into some of our questions, and maybe just share a little bit about your grief experience? Yeah. So, I my yeah, it's funny trying to think of where to start. I have been estranged from my family of origin since 2014. A few years into that, I found out that my mom had early onset dementia. Um, and trying to figure out what that meant, I think, like for me, how I fit into that without compromising on um I think what I owed to myself, trying to navigate that relationship was really it had a profound effect on me. It was a very big focus for a couple of years, and then unfortunately she passed away from COVID-19 in the later stages of dementia in 2021. And then again, all of these questions around, like, there's so many expectations that we put on ourselves that society and other people also put on us when we're in grief, especially when it's a very close relationship like that, that trying to find ourselves and what makes the most sense for us in that moment, and how we want to honor that intimate relationship for ourselves, can be like it's really not evident, but I feel like I learned so much through that. I was like, I don't know how vague that was in the end.
No.
No, that's great. That's great. So before we got on, we kind of talked a little bit about this, and you talked, which I would love for you to kind of go into a little bit of detail about having to navigate like post mom's death and dealing with some of those things while having been estranged from her, and what
Yeah.
that was like for you. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, so my big takeaway with grief now, and I think it's important to mention where this overlaps with my work, and my coaching practice, Art of Discipline. I work with I call myself a change worker or professional enabler. I work with artists and creatives and entrepreneurs. Um, on this idea of undiscipline, like, which is less how do we like amplify creativity and how do we free up that creative energy. If we take for granted that we're creative people everywhere, how do we free up that energy from other places in our life where it's being misdirected? And grief tends to be a really big thing, especially with creative people or frequently empaths. Like, we're very sensitive. Um, we feel deeply not only things that happen in our lives, but things that take us away from our creative practice. So all of the different places that grief shows up. And one of the big things that I have learned um, through this experience with my family that serves me a lot in my coaching work, is that, like, we really need to be intentional about how we create steps for us to move through grief. And grief is such a
it's such a nebulous emotion. It's like it's so charged and yet it's so hard to hold at the same time. And I mentioned that, like, so frequently we complain about like all of the administrative stuff we need to do. Like when there's a death, you're overwhelmed with like these feelings. It's like there's shock, it's hard to handle. And then all of a sudden you need to like do paperwork and like figure out like a reception for people after. Like it's just like it's bizarre. Um and for me, what I ultimately chose in my estrangement story, because there's no right answer to any of these things, but what made the most sense for me was to not be present for my mom's funeral, and to not get in contact with my family of origin during that time, because I decided it wasn't safe for me, ultimately. And so I missed out on all of that stuff, on like what it is to like go through someone's things after they die, and just like that kind of like going through pictures to try and like figure out what images you want to have around for the wake or the funeral. And all of these things, like it really threw me into like pretty deep isolation. And I'm lucky to have, as part of my chosen family, my mom's childhood best friend. But other than that, even my spouse, who's amazing and so supportive, maybe met my mom like twice. So it was deeply isolating. And then even for the people who were in it with me, my chosen family and my mom's best friend, and my mom had a sister-in-law who had stayed in touch when my mom was getting sick with dementia. They didn't know how to navigate this without the norms either. So I found that like I needed to be able to access this other part of my brain that could continue to be kind of a caretaker for grieving Sam, who could create these kind of intentional spaces and steps of like closure and letting go. And I think even when we're doing stuff that's like it's so practical and it's so normalized around like wakes and funerals and all of those things, we forget how deeply symbolic that stuff is, and that like that's the reason why we do them, right? It's because it's helping to structure our brain, move through something so nebulous and process it to be able to move into eventually um the new reality without that person later on.
Yeah. Well, and I like the word intentional. I mean, I think that that's something that we really have to recognize, because sometimes we feel like we're just being, kind of dragged along by the process, and
Totally.
the emotions are just coming to us, and we just feel like we're sort of at their mercy. And so, choosing at some point when we're able to do that. In the very beginning, maybe we don't have the energy or the clarity to do that, but at some point, trying to be intentional with this process. I think what's interesting about it is that I think sometimes we really do have an instinct in terms of what we need, what we don't need. Like you said, like trying to protect our safety and being mindful of boundaries and things like that. But we are still part of some community or something somewhere that's having expectations of us. How do you navigate some of that in terms of what other people think we should be doing, or how we should be feeling, or how we should be participating or not?
Yeah. So and again, to highlight, like, maybe this is I think there's so many universalities in grief, even though each of our experiences is so individualized, and each of our grieving experiences inside of one human are so different. But being estranged, being abandoned by a lot of my family. Now I'm laughing. It gets darker. Everybody, just prepare yourselves. um, it was sort of like fuck 'em. There was a lot of, I needed to remind myself that like my family is my chosen family and the people who show up for me, and I don't owe anything to the people who abandoned me at the time when I was reaching out and needed support. There was a question that I kept on coming back to, which I had learned from being coached. This was before I was a coach, but I think this is part of the reason my coaching had such a profound effect on me. It was like, who do you want to be in this moment? And like without um
uh, without dismissing how incredibly intense and overwhelming grief is, it's also this remarkable opportunity for transformation. Like you're going through a change no matter what. Like, and that's what grief is. And to be able to find in spite of that, like what, um, just that coming back to that question of like, I still get to decide who I am in this moment. Like it's true. Sometimes we can feel like we're being dragged along. And again, when you are in a safe enough and normal enough structure or common enough structure where like you're moving through those sort of normative things that feel mundane, they're actually helping you along, right? It's only when those things are unsafe, you don't have access to them, that I think we start to be called upon to be intentional, even in those moments when we're not feeling like it. And so for me, what happened was I found out that my mom had been taken to the hospital and was unresponsive about 2 weeks before she passed. Um, and so I did the thing that most people do, regardless, which is that I immediately went there. And when I was outside the hospital, I found out that two of my family members who I don't want to see were there, who it's not safe for me to see. It's probably the better way to put it. And so in that moment outside the hospital, I had to decide that I wasn't going to go in and say goodbye. Um, and we spoke with staff. My spouse was there supporting me, and it wasn't there wasn't an option to be able to go in without them. Um, and so it was this moment of like of yes, I think this is one of the places I started asking myself that question of who do I want to be in this moment. And I decided that I didn't want to be someone who was just going along with obligation. And I didn't want to be someone who was opening themselves up to abuse. I did want to be someone who was honoring the relationship with my mom, which even though it was complicated, like there was still a lot of love in there. Um and but like I I think one of the things my therapist said to me in a different situation but related was she was like, I just want to support you so that you don't have any regrets, that you pick the thing where you don't have any regrets. And she's so supportive. I love her so much, but it really hit me weird because I was like, regrets, I regret all of this. Like all of this is shit. I wouldn't pick any of this.
Yeah.
And so so then all of a sudden that was a big shift for me. It was like, oh, so it's not about not having regrets. It's about what's the path of the least amount of regrets. Or this idea of like, there's no right decision. How do I make the decision I'm making right? And being outside the hospital and choosing not to go in was a, a, a big, it was a very big moment. It was a very profound moment for me. And there was I think it was the start of knowing I was never going to see her again. Um, and also like there was relief in the fact that like even in this high stakes moment, I still chose myself. Um, which I guess you don't always know if that's what you're going to do before you're faced with it. And so again, when after she passed and it came to her the time for her funeral, um, I decided again that it wasn't going to be a space that was safe for me. It wasn't going to be a space that was going to honor my relationship with my mom. And so when I decided not to go, I didn't want to let go of this fact that I still deserved that moment of grieving. And also that I wasn't alone. And like, there were like, I was the only one who would not, as far as I know, I'm the only one who wouldn't have been safe going to the funeral. Um, but I wasn't the only one who felt that it wasn't honoring her or my relationship with her. So what I ended up doing was coordinating with her friends and other family members to have a memorial for her a few weeks later, where I would be able to do the things that would help give me that kind of closure, that would help give me that
Mhm.
kind of like the here are the things that represent what this relationship was for me. Um, and I think, yeah, that was, I guess those are kind of the big parts in that start of that journey around what it meant to be intentional around creating those steps for grief.
If you're looking for a place where you don't have to explain why the days feel different after someone you love has died, we created something for you. The Grief Ladies community is our private, free Facebook group where you can connect with others who get it. It's a space for steady support, real conversations, weekly prompts based on our grief framework, and guided tools you can use at your own pace.
You'll also get early access to workshops, new resources, and behind the scene updates from our podcast. If you want a community that's honest, compassionate, and grounded in practical support, come join us. Just search the Grief Ladies community on Facebook. We'd love to have you.
Yeah. I think what you're describing are some really big moments, and it's as we're reflecting on those things, because I think at any point through a person's grieving journey, they feel like there's crossroads and, decisions and things that you have to make along the way. And as you said, these are really difficult things, choosing to go into the hospital or not, choosing to participate in the funeral or not. And sometimes we also have to remember, like you said, like there is going to be regret because this is such a tough situation. What makes these moments so hard is that we don't like either of our options. No options feel good,
Yeah.
So when we're able to reframe that I was faced with two very difficult things and I just did the best I could, taking the path that felt less hurtful or less painful in that moment, and I did the best with that information, that's where we have to kind of reframe things, I
Yeah.
think, you know, and that's so, so important to be able to do that. So, how do you feel, Sam, that is playing into your grief now, your life, and how you're proceeding with some of the other changes that I'm sure are happening?
Um, and as far as how I'm like continuing to like embrace grief and like the stuff
Yeah.
and yeah, as like my jam. Yeah. Um I continue to it I think it's funny, I feel like I have this accelerated relationship with grief, and I kind of I want people to, how to put this? Um okay. Back in the early days of the pandemic, my husband, who's French, when they started reopening the restaurants and like there was like outdoor dining everywhere, he was like, "Oh my God, what if this is my fault?" Because like I'm like, now New York has terraces like in France. This is amazing. This is the only thing that's been missing from New York. The whole time we've been here, like it's weird. I'm like excited about the pandemic, and I was like, no, it's like it's everything, it's the whole world. So of course there's good mixed in with it, right? Let's take advantage of our terraces and our outdoor dining. um, but like I think that's one of the things that happens with grief is like there shouldn't be any good that comes out of it because it's such a painful loss usually what we're dealing with. But like the thing is that grief is so all encompassing that of course there's good in there. And a thing that I think a thing that makes me so passionate about this that that has really stopped me in my tracks a number of times is like when I see people stopping themselves from feeling all of their feelings or trying to shake off grief or trying to get past it. Or I've heard people say stuff "Oh, I don't want you to be stuck in grief. I don't want you to feel like this is everything or this is forever." And I think the only surefire way to be stuck in grief is to try and stop ourselves from feeling it as deeply as we're called to feel it. Um, so being able to help people and like I've guided people like very serious losses of family members, but I also guide people in what can maybe feel like a more frivolous sort of thing. It's like I grieve that I haven't been making art for 5 years, and like that's also real grief. That's also holding you
Mhm.
back and creating steps around that, like creating intentional things that we can do to kind of process that and feel closure around it and let it go. And
reconnect to those other parts of ourselves that we're maybe shutting off because of how uncomfortable it is. Like it's so freeing and it's so transformative. Loss is just a part of life. And without going too high on my little soapbox over here, but like the other thing I feel really passionate about with grief is that I think that it's the back half of gratitude. You know, the same way that you don't have dark without lightness, you don't have gratitude without grief. The more deeply we're able to feel grief and what was missing and what's lost and what we wish we had, all of these different things, like the more deeply we're able to appreciate the things that are here. And to celebrate all of the opportunities that we do have and take advantage of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I love that, and first, I just want to really thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing this with us, and just hearing your story and how brave you were to make that decision not to go into the hospital and the funeral. And I just want to commend you for that, for trusting yourself and knowing what was best for you. And I think that's just amazing.
Thank you.
And I think it's what, some of us are afraid not to do those things, and feel we do them because it's what we should be doing. But we sometimes have to trust ourselves and what's best for us. And it's not always easy. Doesn't mean it's easy. I'm sure it wasn't easy not going, in there, but you needed to do what was best and safest for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and
I'm real.
I really appreciate that, and I think when we have it's not right, none of it is easy, but the scenario where we have our own back is the one where we feel the most in touch with our resilience. So I think it,
Exactly.
in a way, it does make it the easiest one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you still were able to have that ritual, because I'm a big believer in rituals, and you're so right about what you were saying about funerals and all. It is our chance to come together and grieve together. And I think it's so important. And I'm so glad that you had support and were still able to do that. But I'm curious, you talked about like being able to really, which I love, sit with your grief really and feel those feelings and lean into it, and maybe use some creative tools to be able to express it. Can you share maybe some things that you've done or other people that have done to kind of be able to get some of that grief out of their bodies and maybe into something creative?
Yeah, yeah. So I think first I feel like maybe I've been a little vague, and it's probably helpful to be a little bit more specific when I'm talking about doing things intentionally, to help process and move through grief. One part of that is a ritual, either allowing ourselves to participate in the rituals that are available to us, or creating rituals, which I'll circle back to in a second. But the other part of that is creating community, either tapping into the community that is available to us or creating community. Because you did touch on this before, Karen, and it is really important that like I wasn't safe being in the primary community that was around my family of origin, and not feeling so isolated and like no one else was going through what I was going through. It was very easy at first to be like, I have no community. Um, Honestly, sometimes when I think about these things, I'm like, wow, I don't even know how I came up with that at that time, but whatever. I think that's like another weird function of grief brain. We're late for everything. We can't remember where our keys are, but we show up for ourselves in really impressive ways. Anyway, one of the things I did when I first found out my mom was in the hospital, and I was starting to feel that grief, is when I had these moments of being okay. I had to take advantage of them, and so I booked a friend for lunch every single day that she was in the hospital. I made sure that I was going to see someone for a couple of hours, and it was almost always someone who had never met my mom, but that didn't make a difference. I was still making my community for me and the people who I felt safe being vulnerable with. Um, and the same, a lot of the people who I invited to her memorial were people who had already been to the funeral, and like for them it was like, I don't really need that, and it was like, well, I need you, so you know, put on your big kid pants and come out, or whatever the expression is. It was a little funny, being like, I think we're always someone's child even when we're an adult, and like
like having these moments of like, I really struggled when I was planning that memorial around like, I want someone else to do this. Like, I'm the youngest one here. I'm her daughter. If someone else is supposed to be taking care of me at this point, like, where were these adults my whole childhood? And they're still not showing up now. And I was so mad. And I had this moment of like, oh, well, when I was a kid, it was inappropriate for me to be the adult in the room. And that's not the case anymore. And even if I wish someone else could figure out this for me, like it's not inappropriate for me to step into this position at this point. And that was also a big like watershed moment for me as far as like being able to like step into taking care of myself, which I think is it's another um element to grief when we're experience grief between generations, like a loss of like the previous generation and everything. I feel like I'm getting further away from your question. Creativity,
No,
creativity and
you're
ritual.
there.
No, it was perfect, Sam. What you talked about was perfect. It went where it needed to go. That's I'm a believer, you know.
Yeah.
Around intention, and I remember it now. Intention and ritual. Um, I think uh, especially when we're denied the kind of like normal or common things, you know, being denied like being present in the hospital, being a part of any of those administrative stuff, all those things. But even when we are doing the, you know, quote unquote normal thing, um, I think a lot of the ritual for helping us move through grief is experiment. Like part of us needs to be like a scientist in this experiment of like what's going to create these kind of, I think of them as like condensation points of like a place for like some feeling to like condense around and for me to be able to feel it and release it into the world. And journaling was frequently that, writing poetry was frequently that. Uh, some of the art that I was making at that time had a lot to do with intergenerational trauma and thinking about like the body and those sort of things. Um, which maybe sounds really romantic. I'm sewing my own hair into photographs, so it was weird too. Kids at the same time, but grief is weird anyway.
Yeah.
But like a lot of those times those things would be really helpful, but then other times they wouldn't. And there's nothing more frustrating than like when you're feeling like kind of some like emotion stuck and then you go to journal or make some art and it feels like it doesn't scratch that itch. And so I think also like having uh, being kind of pragmatic about being able to shift from one thing to the next thing. Okay, if this isn't working, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to see if this helps me to feel this thing. Like really, it was my willingness to keep on trying different
Mhm.
things uh, that led to me like being able to get what I needed in those moments.
Before we jump back into the episode, we want to share something that's really close to both of us. The Grief Experience, Tools for Acceptance, Resilience, and Connection, is not only a powerful book, it's actually how we met.
We were two of the 25 authors who came together to write this collection. Each chapter offers a personal story about grief, different relationships, different circumstances, different ways people try to make sense of life after someone they love died. Readers tell us these stories feel honest, compelling, and surprisingly reassuring. Many say it helped them feel less alone in what they're carrying.
What makes this book unique is that it doesn't stop at the story. Each chapter ends with a practical tool, something the reader can use right away. One reviewer said the suggestions at the end of the chapter became a lifeline when they weren't sure what to do next. If you're looking for grounded support, or you're a therapist wanting to understand better the reality of grief from many angles, this book offers connection, clarity, and real guidance, not cliches.
You can find The Grief Experience on Amazon, and we'd love to get your feedback.
So I'm gonna switch gears slightly because this is I'm actually kind of excited to talk about this in this aspect. So we're moving into the Celebrate Their Life segment, which is really it's I just work with so many clients that get so stuck on the death and the ending, and they focus on what was lost and the relationship that they don't get to have now, that they miss out on what we did have with the person, right? And so, how do we honor that? How do we continue that relationship, that connection with them? And, you know, um, with every relationship, there's good, bad, ugly, right? We can't say that any relationship, I think, is completely perfect, right? And I think it's important as we honor all aspects of the people who died in our life, right? And be okay with that. And so I'm curious for you with your mom, how do you still honor maybe the good aspects that you had with her or the good memories and the happy times?
Um, yeah, I think there's it's a it's a big it's a big mix. Probably the thing that gets the closest to that is spending time with my chosen family and is spending time with her childhood best friend and hearing stories about when they were young. Um, and that is really meaningful to me. We have like a very special relationship aside from that. So like that's not the only thing that we bond over, but then remembering that like that's how we found each other feels really beautiful. I think I might be jumping ahead, but the thing that makes me actually feel the closest to my mom is when I try and figure out, like, what the fuck were you doing those times when I like, what was going through your head? I think my mom will always be a mystery to me. Like, a lot of parents are a lot of like, especially a lot of complicated relationships with parents. But like, she was a victim of controlling men, in the white supremacist patriarchy, and only felt safe when, like these like, when, uh, toxic men and narcissists like my dad were controlling her and like creating these situations, and that led to her essentially turning her back on me. So it's like how like trying so I think for me, a thing that kind of interests me where can feel close to her is kind of being in that murky space that I'll never quite be able to reconcile between here's a victim, and here's someone who did have agency. That my parents didn't come to my wedding in France. I think because my dad was taking a stand against me having any autonomy, is how I best understand it. And part of me is like, well, how would she have been able to do that? She always said that was like one of her biggest regrets was that she didn't come to my wedding, which, yeah, man, should be. Was great. Anyway, but I wonder, like, and I'll talk about this with my chosen family aunt around, like, it's like, well, how could she have done that? Like he was putting so much pressure on her. He was making that so impossible for her, and at the same time, like, she wasn't really trying. Like, she didn't exercise that agency. So I think it's like I can feel the most tenderness towards her when I'm allowing myself to feel that frustration and that anger at the same time. Um, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does. And I love that it's probably different than what we've heard on some of these other podcasts for this segment. And so I like that. I'm grateful for, to just show that. And I think for our listeners that have had complicated relationships, understanding that this is still something that it's okay to honor your grief and it's okay to honor them. And um, I'm just, I'm just so happy that you have found your chosen family and that you have that support, and especially and mom's friend, like you're getting to also probably learn about mom at a very different point in her life that from her friends. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes honoring the person is also thinking about our own legacy. And if there was a complicated relationship, being able to understand, just as you're doing, why, where was she coming from, and trying to
Mhm.
understand them a little bit better. And not even always to condone or excuse the behavior, but also to understand history and patterns. And if we are in relationships or we're parents ourselves and thinking about how I want my legacy to be different, and what I want differently going forward. So there's so many different ways to do that, I think,
Absolutely.
Sam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that is exactly another one of those places where like grief has this really beautiful transformative power, and like it lets us, the more we're able to feel grief, the more we're able to be in touch with that, um with what's not reconcilable, with what will always be tender, with, like I think that's where we let ourselves be open to doing things different, to like being able to experience the kind of self-awareness that allows us to interact with the next generation differently, want different things for the next generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and as we mentioned earlier, Sam, we always like to leave everybody at the podcast with something to do, a task, something that they can invite or try in their life. I think one thing is that you really talk about being willing to do something different. And when you were finding your support system was limited, trying to grow your support system with that chosen family. And even as you said, like, where are the adults? And we're going to have these feelings, we're going to have the frustrations, but like, oh, I guess I have to step into this role. So I think that's one thing that you've really demonstrated well is your own, willingness to pivot and to kind of take a look. Okay, this is what I have. What am I going to do with it? And I think, there's a real to do aspect to that. Anything that you could leave anybody with today that you think would be helpful to them as they're
Yeah.
trying to navigate their grief process?
Yeah. Um, I think the um all right, this is gonna sound out there, but I'm pretty sure a lot of the things I've said already are kind of out
We're
there.
open
All
for
right.
it.
So one thing that I did with my mom that felt meaningful, that I took from a visual artist Agnes Dennis did with a famous work of hers, was I wrote a poem, I wrote a letter to my mom and made no copies of it and then buried it in a place that felt significant. And A thing that I've done for other forms of grief is to do a similar thing of writing a very tender poem or a letter, and then setting it on fire. Actually, like figuring out a way to like create. I think that um, it can almost feel pedantic sometimes. These like very important symbolic things that allow our brain to do something different helps us like complete the circuit. But like being able to like create a space for an emotion, even a confused emotion, even something that's not clear, and then doing some sort of practice around really letting it go. So like by burying it and letting it be somewhere in the ground where it's going to disintegrate, by setting it on fire and letting it move away in a different way. I think these things can be, as long as you're being safe with fire, everyone, please, can be can be really meaningful. Another thing I did was, a few years after she passed away, I had a ring that I always wore that belonged to her when she was a teenager. We were in Italy, which is a place she'd always wanted to visit, and she'd never been. And I like held the ring and used it as another opportunity to say goodbye, and then left the ring in the river, because for me, I don't feel safe going to her grave, because the moments where I think about doing that is when I might run into someone else, and I
Mm.
wanted to have somewhere different to be able to remember her. So I think those, um not underestimating the value of like how we can move our feelings into objects, and use those as markers to be able to like let things go,
Yeah.
um is a really powerful practice.
Yeah. Yeah, the symbols are really important, and, like, I think Kelly and I always both say to people, it's about getting it out somehow,
Yeah.
and when you say that's weird, that's what's great about grief, like, there's nothing weird. Like, that's it, right, Kelly?
Right.
I'm like, "Oh, I've
No, no,
heard."
yeah.
Nothing weird about
Trust
it.
me, trust
Yeah.
me. I mean, I don't know. I mean, at my grief retreats, I think the fire ritual is just as powerful as some of the other work that we do.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's being able to let it go. We wrap sage around it. We throw it, so
Yeah.
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 Yeah. We need that, like, really physical act sometimes of something that we feel like I'm, like, getting it out and it's gone, that I've
Mhm.
released it somehow, I think we need that. So,
Totally.
well,
Yeah.
Well, Sam, this has been so great and so helpful. If anybody wanted to reach out to you, get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
You can find me on my website, Art of Undiscipline, undiscipline.com, rather than indiscipline, because we even embrace spelling mistakes. Um, that's the best place to find my coaching practice, and sign up for my emails, which is my favorite way to be in touch with people. Um, yeah, I am on the socials, but like rarely. And then if you're interested in checking out my weird and fantastic art, you can also visit my personal website, samsundius.com, and see all the weird stuff that I do with my hair and other things in the world.
Love it. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, Sam, thank you again for being here today. And Kelly and to everybody else, thank you. We're just so glad that you spent time with us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you the next time.
Yeah, hope so. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Grief Ladies.
Don't wait to feel better to get started. Getting started is what makes you feel better. Put this week's tool to work.
If today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs it and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, we're here for you, your trusted grief ladies, navigating this path together.